Hi guys, since we're now entering our second week of social distancing, I figured we should jump back into Macbeth. For those of you who were enjoying it, I'm sorry we had to take some time off. I hope I can get everybody back on board. If you were struggling with it and you thought it sucked, hopefully doing it in this platform will make it not suck. So we start off here, first slide, Macbeth Act 3, Scene 1. Everything looks like a nail to a hammer. This sums up Macbeth in every possible way. He has one technique, one method for dealing with any problem that he sees, and that's to kill it. And whereas before, when he was dealing with the problem of King Duncan, he dealt with problems in terms of morality of his actions. This scene sees him move past that to where now he accepts the fact that he's already done the worst thing he can possibly do, at least in his own mind. So now there are no more restraints on his behavior or his conduct. Lady Macbeth wished that she could make her husband into a monster, and she finds out a little bit to her own horror in this scene just how far she's gone. But before we get too much further into that, let's go ahead and do a quick review of what we did before we left school for spring break. We'll just do a quick review of Macbeth Act 2, and then we'll jump to the climax that takes place, at least the build up to the climax in Act 3, Scene 1. Okay, so Act 2, I trust you guys can read this on your own. The big things that you want to keep in mind here is at the beginning of this scene, excuse me, Macbeth meets Fleance and Banquo, and he's still friends with Banquo. Now, that might not seem like a necessary thing to point out just yet, but you'll see when we get into Act 3, that's an interesting detail given the way the action begins to take shape. The idea that nature is already out of joint, even before Macbeth kills Duncan during this conversation, is seen in the fact that no one knows what time it is, no one can see the stars or the moon. The nature has been overcome by the supernatural, and Banquo's having a bad time dealing with it. Macbeth claims that he hasn't been thinking about the witches, but still propositions Banquo about possibly turning against Duncan. Duncan says he'll listen, but he doesn't commit. He says that his heart is committed to Duncan, but he'll listen to what Macbeth has to say. And Macbeth seems to take him at his word. Remember, keep this relationship in mind given the way things start to change after Macbeth becomes king. Okay. After Banquo and Fleance go to bed, Macbeth becomes haunted by this vision of a dagger that he sees that he can't touch floating in front of him that seems to lead the way to Duncan. Now, Macbeth chooses to interpret this as either fate forcing him to do what he doesn't want to do, or a sign from some mystic power telling him that this is what he needs to do. But regardless, when he gets the signal, Lady Macbeth rings the bell, ding-a-ling, he psychs himself up to go kill Duncan and goes to do the deed. Now, there's a couple of different versions here. The version on the left-hand side begins with the Patrick Stewart version. These are more complete in terms of keeping the words in there, and it lets you compare a couple of different ways of doing the dagger scene. The one on the right comes from what I was hoping to show you guys after we were done. It's a 2015 version that is absolutely brutal and dark, and even includes the murder of the king on stage, something that Shakespeare deliberately did not do. I don't use this film while I'm reading it normally because, as you guys will see, after you watch the ones on the left, the one on the right cuts out a lot of the words, and it reorganizes a lot of the structure of when different speeches happen. Now, I think they actually make good choices in this version on the right, but I don't want to confuse anybody with it. However, it does give you another take on the dagger speech, which I think is a really important speech because it's us starting to see just how unhinged Macbeth can be. Now, on the ones on the left, it's a question, is it madness or is it magic that we don't know? The one on the right, the director and the actor take a very clear stand on that and say that Macbeth is suffering from PTSD. And that is what drives him to become the monster that he becomes. Now, whether you buy that or not, I don't know. But remember, what matters with Shakespeare is that not only as you read it, as you think about it, are you the actor, but you're the director, you're the cameraman. You make the decisions as far as what you think is truly motivating these people. And especially in a play like Macbeth, Shakespeare doesn't come out and tell you. You have to use your imagination. You have to engage with the text and try to figure out what the heck is making this person who was a hero turn into a monster. So that's what we'll be exploring as the play continues onward. Okay, so as Macbeth is going off to go stab Duncan, Lady Macbeth walks on stage, a lot of times walking right past him, not seeing her husband or recognizing him in the dark. She begins talking about how the liquor that she's given the guards to make them drunk has made her bold and how she doesn't feel any fear. But then the second she hears Macbeth cry out, she starts panicking, fearing that the attempt and not the deed has been their undoing. Then she starts attacking Macbeth, saying, like, how could he screw this up? I laid out everything for him. I left it there. I wish I could have stabbed Duncan, but he looks too much like my dad. And this shows you that the plan right away has changed. Remember, in Act 1, Lady Macbeth told her husband, I'll take care of him. I'll kill him. You just leave it to me. And now she couldn't do it. And it's Macbeth who has to go and do the stabbing. Macbeth comes in and he is shaking. He's still carrying the bloody daggers, which was not part of the plan. He is disturbed by the fact that when in the room next to Duncan, one of his sons and the person who's sharing the room with him wake up in the middle of the night as he's killing Duncan. His hands are covered with blood. He hears them start to pray. And he wants to say amen to them. He even says, I who was most in need of blessing. But then the word sticks in his throat. And Macbeth seems to have lost the ability to pray now that he's killed the king. Now Lady Macbeth reaches out. She tries to comfort him, but then she sees the fact that he still has the bloody daggers, and she goes off on him, tells him to go take the daggers back to the room. And he can't go back there. He can't go back to the scene of the crime. And so she takes the daggers and says she'll smear them with blood and smear the guards with blood. And she mocks her husband as if he's a child. She tells him that the dead are but pictures, and that it is the child that fears the painted devil. And you can look at that in a couple of ways. Like, one, she's again infantilizing him, taking away his manhood. Or two, she's throwing back the memory of the dead children in their past. The kids that they had that didn't live. She's throwing that in his face again. So she goes back, and while she's doing the deed, Macbeth hears a knock, knock, knock. And he starts to wonder about his own capacity to be forgiven. And this is an interesting point. Now, the vast majority of us have at least a background knowledge of Christianity. In Christianity, is there anything God can't forgive? Is there something that is beyond God's power to forgive? Now, when I was being raised Catholic, the answer to that is no, except for one thing. God can't forgive despair. Despair is what happens when you lose hope. Because when you personally have lost hope, you've lost the capacity to ask God to help you. And when you can't do that, God can't help you. And here, with this line that's quoted on the page here, Macbeth is suffering from despair. The ocean itself can't wash his hands clean. There's nothing in the universe that can take back what he's done. And he believes he can't be forgiven. And we'll see ultimately he believes he can't even be a good person from this point forward. Lady Macbeth, as you can see in the way the film illustrates it here, comes back gorier than Macbeth in most depictions here. And again, she mocks him when she comes back. My hands are the color of yours, yet I would shame to wear a heart so white. She calls him a coward again, and then she hears the knocking. And again, she takes charge of the plan. Let's go to the bedroom, let's wash our hands, put on our nightgowns, and act like we're innocent. That's what we have to do. And she seems to think, a little water clears us of this deed. How easy it is then. For her, murder is nothing. At least that's what she's telling her husband. He's not so sure. We'll see how that plays out as the play moves forward. All right. So we get, after that very intense scene, a moment of comic relief in the act of the porter. The knocking continues, and a servant of the Macbeth household awakens and drunkenly stumbles his way to the front door while imagining that he is the porter to hell. And we see him imagine on the way meeting three different people, three different souls that have just arrived in hell. The first one is a farmer who hung himself on the expectation of plenty. A good man who, because he thought he was going to get something great, but didn't get it, killed himself. And that's what brought him to hell. The second man that he imagines himself encountering is, well, crap. Okay, so after the porter and Macduff have their jokes about alcohol being an equivocator, Macbeth walks in. Macduff asks him if the king is awake, saying that Duncan asked him to come wake him up in the morning. Macbeth is acting a little suspicious here. He doesn't really greet Macduff properly. He shows Macduff where Duncan is sleeping, but doesn't go inside the room. And as Macduff goes inside to wake Duncan, we in the audience all know is dead, Lennox, the man who arrived with Duncan, starts to recount what a crazy night it was. The wind was howling so hard that it knocked the chimneys down at the camp where they were staying. There were voices in the wind that seemed to curse or prophesy doom. The earth itself shook. And after this lengthy and increasingly horrifying description of what's happening in nature since the death of the king, all Macbeth can do is look at Lennox and say, it was a rough night. Because Macbeth has had a rough night himself. He just murdered his kinsman and king and probably feels pretty raw about it right now. So when Macduff discovers Duncan's body, he raises the alarm, and in the chaos that follows, you get a brilliant moment on stage of simultaneous comedy and drama. The drama of the horror of the death of the king as it's experienced by his loyal subjects, and the comedy of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth trying to act like they are shocked and outraged that this could happen in their home, that this is a surprise to them. Because let's be honest, not only are they not the most coordinated murderers, they're not real great actors either. So Macbeth assumes control of the investigation, goes in to check out the dead body with Lennox. And as they investigate it, Macbeth apparently murders the two prime suspects that he was trying to frame for the death of Duncan. The guards that Lady Macbeth got drunk and drugged so that they could smear them with blood and plant the murder weapons on them, Macbeth just straight up kills. And there's a beautiful staging of this in almost every account, where when Macbeth reveals that he's sorry that he killed the guards in his anger, Lady Macbeth turns and looks at him in shock, because that was not part of the plan. Now, the death of these guards, the death of the prime suspects, makes a few people pretty suspicious. Macduff seems to think that it's a little weird that Macbeth would murder the guards. And in a beautiful moment of irony, Macbeth defends his actions by asking Macduff, who can be wise, amazed, temperate and furious, loyal and neutral in a moment? No man. Macbeth asking Macduff, how can we be two-faced? How can we be double-sided? How can I love my king and look at his murderers and control my rage? Now, we know Macbeth can do this because he had welcome in his hand and in his voice and in his eye when he let Duncan into his home. And that same hand drove the knife that killed the king. So Macbeth organizes the investigation, says, everybody, we're going to meet up here, get your stuff together, we're going to find out who's responsible for the death of the king. As everybody goes off to get their affairs in order, we get a conversation between Duncan's son, Malcolm, and Duncan's son, Donalbain. They are worried that whoever killed their dad is going to come for them next. So they decide to split up. Donalbain goes to hide in Ireland. Malcolm goes to hide in England. Once they have themselves secure, then they'll try to figure out how they can come back against whoever is responsible for the death of their father. They can't stick around because they just saw what Macbeth did to the chief suspects. They know they themselves are suspects because they're next in line for the throne. So it only makes sense that if they were trying to become king fast, that they would murder their father. Rather than let Macbeth investigate them, they decide to get the heck out of there. So, after everyone leaves stage, we get a quick little scene at the end to just sort of move the audience on to Act 3, which is where we're going to see the climax of the story take place. We see Ross, one of the men we met earlier, who is clearly loyal to Duncan, tell Macduff that Macbeth has been named the next king, and that he's going to travel to see and celebrate the coronation of Macbeth. So Ross isn't maybe all that loyal to his King Duncan, or at least to his memory. He's loyal to whoever wears the crown. On the other hand, Macduff refuses to go. Macduff doesn't say why. He simply says to Ross, I'm returning home to my family. But he has to know that this is a dangerous thing for him to do. By not attending Macbeth's coronation, he is not recognizing Macbeth as the true king of Scotland. He is withholding his approval. And he has to know that there could be a comeback against him, a blowback against him from Macbeth by refusing to go to Macbeth's coronation. All right, so that brings us to Act 3. So Act 3 begins with a soliloquy. One character on stage talking to himself from Banquo. Banquo hasn't had a ton of lines so far. It's all about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, but now we get a moment to explore what Banquo is actually thinking in his heart. And we know it's the truth because characters don't lie in soliloquies. The false faces that we put on for everybody else, they fall away when we talk to ourselves. At least that's the way Shakespeare presents it in drama. So the way we're going to do this for Act 3 is I'll put the words on the screen, I'll read them to you, we'll talk about what the words mean, and then we'll move on to the next slide. All right. So we're at the palace. Banquo has come to attend the coronation of Macbeth. And now he steps aside from the parties and the festivities, and he's talking to himself. And he's talking to himself about Macbeth. He says, Thou has it now, King, Cawdor, Glamis. All the weird women promised, and, I fear, thou playedst most foully for it. Yet it was said it should not stand in thy posterity, but that I myself would be the root and father of many kings. If there be truth from them, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine, why, by the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up in hope. But hush, no more. So we see Banquo talking to himself here, thinking about Macbeth, saying that the witches told you the truth, man. But I think you earned this dirty. I think you might have murdered Duncan yourself. But interestingly, Banquo doesn't at this moment resolve to out Macbeth. He instead thinks about what the witches told him, which is, Macbeth, you're a one and done. My kids are going to be the ones who take the crown next. So maybe I'll just sit back and let this play out. And then my kids get to become king next. If the witches told you the truth, maybe they told me the truth too. So here, Banquo, the hero, the loyal man, has again been corrupted a little bit by the witches. He could run away from Macbeth. He could raise armies to fight Macbeth. He could go find Donalbain and Malcolm and try to help them fight Macbeth. But instead, like, well, it's worked out good for Macbeth so far. I'll just watch and see how it works out for me. And then his thoughts get interrupted as Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, Lennox, Ross, and a bunch of other lords and ladies come in. Now Macbeth is dressed as the king. Remember all the stuff we talked about before you guys went on break, where clothing and lines about clothing are really important in this play? Here Macbeth is clothed as the king. And he's speaking as a king to the man who was his friend. He says to everyone in attendance, "Here is our chief guest." And Lady Macbeth chimes in, "If he had been forgotten, it has been a gap in our great feast, and all things unbecoming." Macbeth continues, "Tonight we will hold a solemn supper, sir, and I'll request your presence." Now, he's the king. He doesn't request things. Lady Macbeth is going out of her way to praise Banquo as well. "We're throwing a party tonight. We expect you to be there, Banquo." And Banquo responds, "Let your highness command upon me, to the which my duties are with a most indissoluble tie forever knit." Banquo pledges himself, swears himself to Macbeth with those words. "Whatever you order me, my king, I will do because it is my duty. And that duty cannot be dissolved. That duty is tied forever to my conduct." So Banquo seems to be aligning himself straight up, Team Macbeth, as we move forward. And then Macbeth pivots. He asks Banquo, "Ride you this afternoon? Are you going riding this afternoon?" Banquo replies, "Aye, my good lord." Macbeth then continues, "We should have else desired your good advice, which still hath been both grave and prosperous in this day's council, but we'll take tomorrow. Is it far you ride?" So Macbeth and Banquo still haven't had their chance to have the little conversation about what the witches really meant yet. Macbeth seems to be implying, I want to have that conversation. I just can't say it in front of everybody, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. Are you going to ride very far? And Banquo's response is, "As far, my lord, as will fill up the time twixt this and supper. Go not my horse the better, I must become a borrower of the night for a dark hour or twain." So Banquo doesn't really answer the question about how far he's going to ride, because he doesn't honestly know. He just says, "I'll go as far as my horse can take me. I'll go out and I'll come back. And if my horse slows down because he gets tired, I might be a little late for dinner." So Macbeth tells him, "Fail not our feast. Make sure you get to the party." And Banquo agrees, "My lord, I will not." So Macbeth changes the subject again. We hear our bloody cousins are bestowed in England and in Ireland, not confessing their cruel parricide, filling their hearers with strange invention. But of that tomorrow, when, therewithal, we shall have cause of state, craving us jointly. Hie you to your horse, adieu, till you return at night. Goes Fleance with you? So Macbeth simply says, I heard a rumor Malcolm and Donalbain have split up. One's in Ireland, one's in England. But they won't admit that they're the ones who killed their father. But we'll talk about all this tomorrow. So, on your ride, is your son going with you? Does it seem like Macbeth is a little bit too interested in what Banquo is doing tonight? I mean, it could be he's just being good-natured and making conversation, but anytime somebody wants to find out your exact whereabouts, your movements, when and with whom, it stops being a friendly conversation and it starts being an interrogation. And it's almost like Macbeth is interrogating his friend here. Banquo answers him honestly, Aye, my good lord, our time does call upon us. So Macbeth smiles, says, I wish your horses swift and sure of foot, and so I do commend you to their backs. Farewell. And Banquo leaves. Then Macbeth turns to everyone in attendance and he says, Let every man be master of his time till 7 at night, to make the society the sweeter welcome. We will keep ourselves till supper time alone. While then, God be with you. So Macbeth dismisses all of the other people who were there in attendance, saying that he just needs a little bit of quiet time, some alone time. You guys can go hang out with whoever you want to, but make sure you're at the party at 7 o'clock. And then everybody leaves except Macbeth and one of his servants. Macbeth says to the servant, Sir, a word with you. Attend those men our pleasure. They are, my lord, without the palace gate. Bring them before us. So it starts to get a little suspicious here. Macbeth asks the servant, Are those guys who wanted to talk to me still out there? The servant says, Yeah, they're waiting outside the gate. Macbeth says, Bring them in. After he just said he wanted to spend his time alone, now he's talking to these 3 guys he didn't want anybody else to see him talking to. And when the servant leaves, we again get a soliloquy where Macbeth shows the audience what's really happening inside of him. To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that which could be feared. 'Tis much he dares, and to that dauntless temper of his mind he hath a wisdom that doth guide his valor to act in safety. There is none but he whose being I do fear, and under him my genius is rebuked, as it is said, Mark Antony's was by Caesar. Now, there's a historical allusion in there, also a reference to another one of Shakespeare's plays. But just in those words, you probably picked up, Macbeth is worried about Banquo. And he should be. What did the witches tell him? Macbeth will be king, but the children of Banquo will become the future kings. Can Macbeth trust Banquo anymore, knowing that that's in the future? Not only does he have to worry about the prophecy, but Banquo himself is a pretty great warrior. He stood side by side with Macbeth on the day of the double invasions, and they carved their way through 2 enemies together, 2 armies together. He's smart, he's capable, and Macbeth says he's the only man I'm afraid of now. With him still around, I can't be comfortable as king. My genius is rebuked, as it is said, Mark Antony's was by Caesar. Caesar is the Caesar, Julius Caesar, the man who was briefly emperor of Rome before he was assassinated, his number one friend, his peer, was a guy named Mark Antony. But Mark Antony could never become the number one guy until Caesar was out of the way. And in fact, after Caesar was dead, Mark Antony worked together with Caesar's adopted son and another general who was loyal to Caesar to put down all of the people who conspired to have Caesar assassinated. And as soon as the dust was settled from that conflict, Mark Antony attacked Caesar's son. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Macbeth continues thinking about Banquo. He chid the sisters when first they put the name of king upon me and bade them speak to him. Then, prophet-like, they hailed him to father a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, and put a barren scepter in my gripe. Thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. So here we see what truly has Macbeth upset. They placed upon my head a fruitless crown. Now go back to Lady Macbeth in that Act 1 where she was talking about let nothing come between him and the golden O, that golden round, that crown, how there's a double entendre there. What does a crown look like? Well, it's a circle. They placed on my head a fruitless crown and put a barren scepter in my grip. A scepter. You guys know what that is? That's like the staff. I'll put a picture of it before I post this thing. The rod of royalty. It looks kind of like a mace, but it's usually decorated with jewels, and it's what the kings hold as a symbol of their power. But this scepter, this rod, is barren. Now, when you think about that phrasing there, fruitless and barren, what else does that conjure to your mind? Macbeth is dwelling upon the fact that he has no children, that his wife is now fruitless, and that his scepter is barren. So, when he dies, the crown will be taken away from his family by an unlineal hand, an unlinal hand. Someone who's not part of his family tree gets to become king. No son of his will get to take over. If it be so, then for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind. For them, the gracious Duncan, have I murdered, put rancors into the vessel of my peace, only for them. And mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man, to make them kings, the seed of Banquo kings. Rather than so, come fate to the list, and champion me to the utterance. Who's there? So he gets interrupted in his speech. But can Macbeth let Banquo and his children live? In his mind, he can't. Because otherwise, all the work, well, all the murder that he did to make himself king, and that's a big sacrifice that he's made. He's, in his own mind, condemned his everlasting soul to eternal damnation. I did all that just to make Banquo's kids king? Oh, no. That can't stand. So what's Macbeth going to do? Well, if we're reading along, we get the information because they introduce two new characters to us who don't have names, but they're called murderers. So Macbeth has hired some hitmen. He tells the attendant, go to the door, stay there till we call. And when the attendant leaves, Macbeth starts talking to these murderers. Now in this first line, Macbeth shows this isn't the first time he's talked to these guys. Was it not yesterday we spoke together? The first murderer says, it was, so please your highness. Well then now, have you considered of my speeches? Know that it was he in times past which held you so under fortune, which you thought had been your innocent self. This I made good to you in our last conference, passed on in probation with you. How you were born in hand, how crossed with instruments, who wrought them, and all things else that might, to half a soul, and to a notion crazed, say, thus did Banquo. So Macbeth has been working on these guys for a while, and he's been poisoning their minds against Banquo, saying all the problems you have in this life, everything that's gone wrong for you, it was really Banquo. It's all Banquo's fault. But I told you the truth. Now, it's interesting here. Macbeth is using a scapegoat in order to get people to do his dirty work for him. This is something that politicians did before Macbeth and still do to this day. Blame Banquo. Blame Banquo for everything that's wrong in your life. Now, what are you going to do about that? So the first murderer says, you made known to us. So I did, and went further, which is now the point of our second meeting. Do you find your patience so predominant in your nature that you can let this go? Are you so gospeled to pray for this good man and for his issue, whose heavy hand hath bowed you to the grave and beggared yours forever? So Macbeth, even as he was being played by Lady Macbeth in Act 1, he learned a thing or two. He learned something about turning good men into bad men. It's not enough that he just scapegoats Banquo, but now he's got to prod them to action. Banquo is the source of all of your misfortune. Are you such a good Christian that you'll just pray for him? Or are you going to do something about it? Are you going to hope for good things for this man and for his children who's destroyed your life, who has sentenced your children to poverty? Is that what you're going to do? And the first murderer's answer should echo back to something we've heard before. We are men, my liege. That idea of masculinity. Would a man put up with what has happened to you at the hands of Banquo? A man would do something about it. Aye, but in the catalogue of men, as hounds and greyhounds, mongrels, spaniels, curs, sloths, water rugs, and demi-wolves are clept by all the name of dogs. The valued file distinguishes the swift, the slow, the subtle, the housekeeper, the hunter, and every one according to the gift which bounteous nature hath closed, whereby he does receive particular addition. So in response to the statement from the murderers that we're men, Macbeth's like, well, I can see that, but there are all kinds of men in this world. You've got greyhounds, you've got mongrels, you've got spaniels, you've got curs. You've got good dogs and you've got bad dogs. You've got wolf dogs and you've got lap dogs. What kind of dog are you? From the bill that writes them all alike, and so of men. Now, if you have a station in the file, not of the worst rank of manhood, say it, and I will put that business in your bosoms whose execution takes your enemy off, grapples you to the heart and love of us, who wear our health but sickly in this life, which in his death were perfect. So if you're a real man, if you're the kind of man that isn't some type of dog, if you're not, forgive the phrase, a bitch, will you do what I need you to do? And in doing, take out the man who is your enemy and earn the love of your king. Because I'll be honest, I can't rest comfortably until this man is dead. The second murderer replies to this prompting, I am one, my liege, whom the vile blows and buffets of the world have so incensed that I am reckless what I do to spite the world. So the response to the second murderer is, I've seen so much bad. I've had such horrible misfortune in my life. I've lived such a brutal, horrible life that I don't care about the rules of this world anymore. In fact, whatever the orders and rules of this world are, I hate, and I will do my best to go against. The first murderer continues. And I and others so weary with disasters, tugged with fortune, that I would set my lie on any chance to mend it or be rid on it. So his friend continues, I've had a bad life too. I felt like I had my chances, but they never panned out. So that I will take any chance to fix my life, or, in the effort, take that chance, and if it costs my life, I'll die. But one way or the other, I want my chance. So now Macbeth closes the deal. Both of you know Banquo was your enemy. They agree. True, my lord. Macbeth brings it home. So he is mine, and in such bloody distance that every minute of this being thrusts against my nearest of life. And though I could with barefaced power sweep him from my sight and bid my will avouch it, yet I must not, for certain friends that are both his and mine, whose loves I may not drop, but wail his fall, who I myself struck down, and thence it is that I to your assistance do make love, masking the business from the common eye for sundry weighty reasons. So Macbeth tells him, you know this guy's your enemy? They agree. Good, because he's my enemy too. Now, I'm the king. I could kill him if I wanted to, but he's got friends. Friends I don't want to alienate. I've got my reasons. I'm not going to go into them now, but because I don't want to move against him overtly, I need you two to take him out covertly. And they agree. The second murderer says, we shall, my lord, perform what thou command us. If the king gives him the order, it's good enough for him, he'll go do it. The first murderer starts to pledge, though our lives, he was ready to say, if this kills me, I'll do it for you. But Macbeth's already heard what he wants to hear. Your spirits shine through you. Within this hour at most, I will advise you where to plant yourselves, acquaint you with the most perfect spy of the time, the moment on it, for it must be done tonight. And something from the palace. Always thought that I require a clearness, and with him, leave no rubs nor botches in the work. Fleance, his son, that keeps him company, whose absence is no less material to me than his father's, must embrace the fate of that dark hour. Resolve yourselves apart. I'll come to you anon. So Macbeth lays out the plan for him. He doesn't need Lady Macbeth to do his murder planning anymore. He's got it. He says, okay, ride out from the castle. I'll meet you, and I'll tell you where you can find Banquo, and then you'll know what to do to him. But while you're at it, make sure you kill his son Fleance as well. I need Fleance dead just as much as I need Banquo dead. The murderers agree. We are resolved, my lord. Macbeth is happy. I'll call upon you straight. Abide within. And then they leave. And now Macbeth gets a very, very brief soliloquy here. It is concluded. Banquo, thy soul's flight, if it find heaven, must find it out tonight. So not only has Macbeth decided to murder his best friend, he's hired hitmen to do it and made sure that the hitmen understand, not only are you going to kill my best friend, but you got to kill his kid too. And the second they leave, all Macbeth has to say about it is, it's done. Banquo will die tonight. If you're going to heaven, you're going to find out soon. All right. So, scene 2. We're going to go ahead and power through this, even though we're over 45 minutes. You guys can pause this and take a bathroom break and have snacks and come back and forth to us. You got a whole week to work on this, so we're going to power through for a while we can. So in scene 2, Lady Macbeth comes in with a servant. So Lady Macbeth asks the servant, is Banquo gone from the court? The servant says, aye, madam, he returns again tonight. Lady Macbeth says, say to the king, I would attend his leisure for a few words. And the servant's response is, madam, I will. Now, it's a brief little exchange. It might seem like a throwaway couple of lines, but there's a world of meaning happening here, guys. Lady Macbeth doesn't know what's going on. She's gone from being the one in control, the plan maker, to not even knowing where Banquo's at. She certainly doesn't know that her husband is planning on killing him yet. Then she has to tell the servant to tell the king she wants to talk to him, if that's okay. She needs to get permission to see her own husband. Things have changed a lot from Act 1. Now Lady Macbeth gets a soliloquy. Naught's had, all spent, where our desire is got without content. 'Tis safer to be that which we destroy than by destruction dwell in doubtful joy. So Lady Macbeth's attitude has changed as well. Not just her power in relation to Macbeth, but the way she feels about her position itself. Nothing is had, and all is spent. I spent everything that I could spend, and I have nothing to show for it. Our desire is got without content. They're king and queen, but they're not comfortable. They're not safe. In fact, speaking of safety, it's safer to be that which we destroy than by destruction dwell in doubtful joy. She's saying it would be better to be dead, to be the king who was destroyed, than to destroy something and not be sure of the joy that you have. So Lady Macbeth isn't really loving the life of a queen right now. Macbeth comes on stage and she has to brighten up right away. How now, my lord? Why keep you alone? Of sorriest fancies your companions making, using those thoughts which should indeed have died, with them they think on. Things without all remedy should be without regard. What's done is done. So right away, she starts trying to pull Macbeth's strings. My lord, why are you keeping to yourself? Your sorry fancies, your fantasies are your companions, are the people you're hanging out with. You're hanging out with the dead memory of Duncan, the dead man. You gotta let that go. We can't do anything about the fact that Duncan is dead. What's done is done. And since we can't do anything about it, should we worry about it? Let it go. Macbeth's response is probably not one that she anticipated here. She knew he was worried, but she assumed he was worried about the fact that Duncan is dead. She doesn't know Macbeth has moved on to other things. We've scotched the snake, not killed it. She'll close and be herself, whilst our poor Malice remains in danger from her former tooth. Macbeth says, our enemies have been wounded, not killed. They will heal themselves and strike at us again. Now, if you're Lady Macbeth, how do you even begin to interpret that? Duncan is dead. How is he going to heal himself and come back on us? But Macbeth keeps pushing. But let the frame of things disjoint. Both the worlds suffer. Ere we will eat our meal in fear and sleep in the affliction of those terrible dreams that shake us nightly. Better be the dead, whom we, to gain our peace, have sent to peace, than on to torture of the mind to lie in restless ecstasy. Macbeth is in bad shape here. He can't really eat. He can't really sleep. And part of it's the fact that it's the guilt over how he killed his king. But rather than focus on the thing he can't control, I think he's with Lady Macbeth that what's done is done. His way of making himself feel better is to act on things that he can control. Duncan is in his grave. After life's fitful fever, he sleeps well. Treason has done his worst, nor steel, nor poison, malice domestic, foreign levy, nothing can touch him further. Duncan's got it good. It's the living who are the ones who are suffering. We're the ones who are in hell. Macbeth almost sounds like he's jealous of Duncan. Lady Macbeth tries to cheer him up. Come on, gentle my lord, sleek over your rugged looks. Be bright and jovial among your guests tonight. She's telling him to put on his happy face. And Macbeth's response is, so shall I love, and so, I pray, be you. Let your remembrance apply to Banquo. Present him eminence, both with eye and tongue, unsafe the while that we must lave our honors in these flattering streams, and make our faces vizards to our hearts, disguising what they are. Now Macbeth doesn't come out and say it, but he's hinting real strongly here that he's got something cooking for Banquo. And he needs Lady Macbeth to talk Banquo up at the dinner so when a bad thing happens to Banquo, no one will think twice about him. Lady Macbeth, who is not dumb, understands exactly what her husband is saying here. And she says, you must leave this. Lady Macbeth doesn't want Macbeth to keep killing people. She certainly doesn't want him to kill Banquo. But Macbeth turns to her and says, oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. Thou knowest that Banquo in his fleance lives. Macbeth is crazy. He knows he's crazy. Full of scorpions is my mind. But the thing he thinks that's making him crazy is the fact that Banquo and Fleance are alive. Now, Lady Macbeth can't tell him, you're crazy. Instead, she tries to talk him out of it. But in them, nature's copy is not etern. They're not going to live forever. So calm down. Macbeth, as soon as she says that, says, there's comfort yet. They are assailable. Then be thou jocund, ere the bat hath flown his cloister's flight, ere to black Hecate's summons the shard-born beetle with his drowsy hums hath rung the night's yawning peal, there shall be done a deed of dreadful note. Macbeth tells his wife, that's my comfort. They can be attacked. So smile, baby. Before the bats fly tonight, before the beetle begins to chirp, before the first church bell of darkness, I'm going to do something real bad. Now, Lady Macbeth is scared at this point. What's to be done? Macbeth, who, remember, shared with her their evil plan, called her his dearest partner in that first letter that he wrote to her. When she asks him, what are you going to do? He won't tell her. Instead, he says, be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud the deed. Come, sealing night, scarf up the tender eye of pitiful day, and with thy bloody and invisible hand cancel and tear to pieces the great bond which keeps me pale. Light thickens, and the crow makes wing to the rooky wood. Good things of day begin to droop and drowse, while night's black agents to their praise do rouse. Thou marvelest at my words, but hold thee still. Things bad begun make strong themselves by ill. So prithee, go with me. Macbeth won't tell her the plan, but he'll cast a spell for them. And look at the wording here. Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, my little duck. Don't worry about it, baby. I've got this. This is not his partner anymore. She's someone he talks down to now. And at the end, he kind of returns all of this horror to her. It was your plan to kill Duncan. And because of you, we started on this path. But since we started down the wrong path, the only way we can get right is to keep doing wrong. So baby, you gotta come with me anyway. And then they walk out together. So you gotta kick back and think about where Lady Macbeth is. Can she trust her husband anymore? Can she trust anybody anymore? She thought she wanted to become queen because it would finally give her control over her life, over her world. Can she control Macbeth anymore? We'll go ahead and stop it there. Even 60 minutes. We'll pick it up here either next week or later on this week, depending on how much work I can get on with my kids are around. If this was useful and you got into it, then cool. Shoot me an email and let me know. If this was a waste of time and you tuned out 5 minutes into it, go ahead and shoot me an email. We'll try to find a way to jazz it up and make it a little more interesting. But I hope you guys are engaging with this stuff. It's a great story. I may not be the greatest storyteller in the world, but I'm doing the best I can with my limited grasp of technology here. But regardless of all that, I hope you guys are safe. I hope you guys are taking good care of yourselves and your families. And I hope I get to see you real soon. Take care, guys.